Good morning. So earlier this year, a federal judge threatened to sanction me for my advocacy on behalf of Sulaiman Abu Ghaith, who is commonly known as a son-in-law of Osama bin Laden. But before I get to that part of my story, let me take you back to May 11th of 2001. I was on the Queen Boat, which is a floating discotheque on the Nile in Cairo, Egypt, where I was teaching English and doing a variety of other things, including falling in love and getting in trouble. And all of a sudden I realized that the boat was being raided. A friend of mine was taken away, and I never saw him again. Their crime, the men who were arrested on the boat that night, was being gay. I decided that I had to do something for myself and, to the extent that I could, for society. I decided to go to law school. Now, I don't know if any of you have gender transitioned, either to male or to female. I gender transitioned to female. I don't know if any of you have gone to law school. I went to law school. I don't recommend doing them both at the same time. By the end of my first year, I was a wreck. I was failing out of school. The only class that saved me was criminal law. I decided to become a criminal defense attorney in memory of the friend that I never saw again from the Queen Boat. I had sex reassignment surgery in Thailand several years later. They do it very well over there. If you're thinking about it, I can recommend a doctor see me afterward. And I'd like to tell you briefly about the couple of weeks leading up to that. I was in Egypt again. I was in Cairo. Once again, I was living on a houseboat. This time I was teaching rather than studying. And I couldn't go to the bathroom without breaking down. I couldn't take a shower without my tears mixing with the water. And one day, I sat down in a taxi cab in Zamalek, which is this posh area. And the way that I sat down suddenly made me aware of my body in a way that I hadn't been all day long, and I just burst into tears. The driver asked me what was wrong. I spoke Arabic. I just said that I had an injury. He looked up at me in the rearview mirror every once in a while after that. So what does all this have to do with practicing law? I became a trial lawyer, handling national security cases and death penalty cases, among other things. And my first terrorism trial involved allegations that my client had conspired with various other individuals in his home country of Trinidad and Tobago to blow up John F. Kennedy Airport in New York. In advance of that case, my client had fought his extradition to the United States. And in connection with that fight, he had submitted an affidavit to the court saying certain things had happened, but there was an explanation for it. At the trial, my client testified. I did his direct examination. On his cross-examination, the government introduced bits and pieces of the statement that he had previously made, but not the rest. And then they argued that those bits and pieces demonstrated that my client had lied on the stand. I tried to get the rest of the story in to say, no, there was more. There was an explanation to those statements that the government took out. The court denied it. Second Circuit Court of Appeals decided it on a completely different issue. The Supreme Court decided not to hear the case. The issue came up again when I was representing Mr. Abu Ghaith earlier this year. This time, I was ready. We got in a lot more of the statement at that trial than I had gotten in at the previous trial. But nevertheless, the government argued the same. Government can pick and choose what it wants to use. Defense can't use what they want to use for a variety of legal reasons that really aren't very interesting, except perhaps on one point. Pause for a moment and consider that proposition. Consider that if you're arrested and if you make a statement to law enforcement, later on, if there's a trial, the government can pick and choose which sentences, which phrases, which words to introduce into evidence against you. And the court may or may not let you introduce anything else. I do what I do in the defense of constitutional rights because they're important in any case. At Mr. Abu Ghraib's trial, in addition to the statement, we also had the issue of exculpatory material. Exculpatory material is material that's favorable to a defendant. The Supreme Court has said for many, many decades, if the government or the prosecution has information that's favorable to a criminal defendant, they got to turn it over. Makes sense, right? That's justice. If the government knows something helpful, they have to give it to the defense. I argued in this case that the government was in possession of such information. The facts that I used were information from the White House and information from Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the alleged mastermind of September 11th, who is currently in Guantanamo Bay. So I had those two sources of information, and I said that based on what we knew, there was reason to believe that the government was in possession of more. The judge denied my motion, and he started talking about sanctions. At the end of that hearing, I said, "Your Honor has raised the specter of sanctions, and I'd like to address it." And he said that I would have the opportunity to address it if and when it was appropriate. And I stood up and I said, "Your Honor, I would like to address it now." CNN International then reported what happened. CNN said that the judge got up off the bench and walked out of the courtroom. But what really matters to me in what I do, in addition to the defense of constitutional rights and principles that I believe in my heart of hearts are important to us all, are the cases that aren't in the news, the cases that you don't hear about, like a sentencing that I had earlier this summer. One of the inmates in my client's case, the gang-related case, had written to the court about how my client was a good person. He ended the letter by saying that as a gay man in jail, it wasn't always easy for him, but my client had always treated him like a human being. I got into court, and for the first time, I was going to talk about being transgender. I talked about that letter. I talked about the inmate who had written it and what it meant, and then I talked about how it was consistent with my own experience with that client as a transgender woman. And that client received the lowest sentence of anyone in that case. That's what matters to me. The edges that I've experienced in my life began on the Queen boat. That was the first edge. The second edge was how it felt to be rendered to a pulp because I was in the wrong body. The third edge is the line that I walk up to in the courtroom when I stand in between the most powerful adversary in the world, the government of the United States, and an individual human being, my client. Those are the three edges. The fourth edge is the top of this paper. Now, I've got shitty news and I've got fabulous news. The shitty news is that an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper is very small. The good news is that it can contain anything. Thank you.